I've shared from the pulpit before about my religious origin story, but some of you might not remember it. Some of you might be new, so here it is again. I grew up in Texas in a not very religious household. My whole family, my extended family, nobody goes to church. But I was curious about religion, sort of weirdly curious about it. And I would go to church with my friends, and since I grew up in Texas, that church was usually Southern Baptist. Eventually, in middle school, I was baptized, saved. And when I went to college, I joined a fundamentalist Christian sorority. I loved the community and the singing and the prayer, and I loved the Jesus that I found in the Bible. But then I was being told by my leaders and my sorority sisters that my GLBTQ friends and family were going to hell. What? In that sorority that I joined, I became the leader in charge of planning community service projects. I know, you're all shocked. I did a whole presentation on the scriptural underpinnings for community service, and I was met with apathy. These young women were committed to saving souls, but not helping people in the here and now. And that was one among many reasons that I eventually left that sorority and ultimately that brand of faith, and I embarked on a religious search thanks to an online quiz called Belief-O-Matic, which brought me to Unitarian Universalism. This is true. I found Unitarian Universalism via online quiz. The first time I ever visited a Unitarian Universalist church in Fort Worth, or UU for short, sometimes we shorten our very long name to UU. The first time I visited a UU church, it was in Fort Worth. Later, I attended and became a member of the church closer to my college campus in Dallas, but that first visit was to a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Fort Worth, and they were having a guest preacher. I have since tried to figure out who this guest preacher was, and I have not been successful. And I don't remember a lot about his sermon. It was a long time ago, and I was new. But I remember that he talked about growing up fundamentalist Christian and knowing that he was gay, and that was against the teachings of his faith. And he said, when he was old enough, Jesus and I left. I loved that. What an impression it made on me. I loved that this man felt like he could leave that church that was harming him, but didn't have to leave Jesus behind. He felt like Jesus could join him as they left that harmful place together. At the UU church that I eventually joined in Dallas, the minister there would begin every prayer with, God of many names, whose mystery is beyond all our naming. I loved that. I loved that openness. It was almost painful how much I loved that openness after leaving behind such a closed tradition. And then I jumped right in. I dove headfirst into Unitarian Universalism, and I learned all about the origins and history of Unitarianism and Universalism, steeped in and rooted in Christianity. And I loved our religious ancestors' insistence on interpreting the Bible with their minds and their hearts. And as I became active in Unitarian Universalism, I learned that we were very open-minded, especially in religious and theological matters. Buddhism? Sure. Paganism? Absolutely. Atheism? Humanism? Pantheism? Come on in. Judaism? Islam? Sikhism? Maybe not as often, but of course, sure. Come on in. Let's learn together. But in practice, despite what I had heard in that first sermon, that inclusion did not always extend to Christianity or to God. Very rarely did it extend to Jesus. I learned that we welcomed drum circles and pagan rituals and Buddhist teachers and atheist study groups, but if you were carrying a Bible or wearing a cross necklace, at best, you would get looked at sideways. At worst, someone would say something unkind. Now, historically speaking, there are many reasons for our trend away from Christianity, despite the fact that our ancestors, both Unitarian and Universalism, do have their origins in Christianity. One of those reasons is that in the early 20th century, it brought the humanist movement. The humanist movement was sort of, I guess you could call it a religious movement that said there is no need for the supernatural, for a deity, for a God. We can rely entirely on what is here and now, human reason, human skill, and ingenuity. And by the 1950s, when this congregation was founded, almost all of the Unitarian churches were synonymous with humanism. And so that's one reason that we have a sort of a DNA or a history that doesn't embrace a lot of God. Another reason is that because a lot of people come into Unitarian Universalism seeking an open-minded faith after having left behind something that left them with religious trauma or religious baggage. A lot of people come in here carrying the painful wounds of whatever religion they have left behind. Not exclusively, but certainly including a lot of our LGBTQ folks. And that's real. That harm is real. And then when they come into this place, if they hear things that sort of remind them of or smack of that old tradition, there is an obvious trauma response, a knee-jerk reaction. And that's another reason. And the third reason, I think, is because we, in our country, we are just sort of steeped in Christianity. It's kind of the water we swim in. Nobody bats an eye when a judge uses a Bible to take an oath, or if the White House decorates for Christmas or hosts an Easter egg roll. But if the new mayor of New York City hosts a feast to break the Ramadan fast, everybody freaks out. That's part of what it means to just sort of live in this Christian culture. And we Unitarian Universalists, we have tried to set ourselves apart from that culture. We've tried to create a safe haven for the seekers and the outsiders. And that's a beautiful impulse. It's a kind and loving thing to want to create a space that is safe and welcoming. But as a faith, over the years, we have become closed-minded in the ways that we try not to be in every other circumstance. Here at this fellowship, people have said to me many times some version of, well, I know you're a Christian, but, and then proceed to tell me why they disagree with my theology. Now, I'm a minister. I can handle it. I can handle assumptions about my theology and correct them if I need to, but how do you think that would make me feel if I was a Christian, especially if I wasn't the minister, if I was a newcomer? How would you think it would feel to those people to know that they left behind a brand of Christianity that was maybe not good for them anymore, but maybe they wanted to bring Jesus with them, and they found out maybe they couldn't here? I don't think that feels very good. And then here's the other thing about that kind of assumption. People are trying to put me in a box. I know you're a Christian, but, and here's the thing. I know this might be a surprise, but I'm not. I'm not a Christian. I'm a religious naturalist. I believe that the holy is within and among all things natural. The earth, its life, the universe. Now, I think the Jesus of the Gospels, especially Luke, I love the Gospel of Luke. I think that Jesus is a super cool guy. I want to be more like him. I think our world would be better if we were a little more like him. But more importantly, and this is the reason I think people sometimes assume I'm a Christian, is because I think that as people who live in the United States, and especially in Northeast Wisconsin, that we need to be more literate about Christianity and the Bible than we are. We need to be able to join the conversation that is already happening around us and be able to stake our own claim in that conversation, that culture-shaping conversation. Now, in May of 1819, bear with me for a moment, a little history here. In May of 1819, almost 207 years ago, a famous preacher named William Ellery Channing gave a very, very long sermon at the ordination of a new minister in Baltimore, Maryland. And in that sermon, he laid out what it meant to be Unitarian, which up until that point had just been a slur, a criticism thrown at our ancestors who were preaching a message different from their Congregationalist counterparts. Namely, they were preaching that God was one being, Unitarian, not three beings, Trinitarian. And they were preaching that Jesus was separate from God and that we should use reason, our minds, when interpreting the Bible. Now, in that sermon, the one given at that ordination in 1819, Channing says this, quote, "We reason about the Bible precisely as civilians do about the Constitution under which we live, who, you know, are accustomed to limit one provision of that venerable instrument by others, to fix the precise import of its parts by inquiring into its general spirit, into the intentions of its authors, into the prevalent feelings, impressions, and circumstances of the time when it was framed. Without these principles of interpretation," he says, "we frankly acknowledge that we cannot defend the divine authority of the Scriptures. Deny us this latitude, and we must abandon the book to its enemies." End quote. Deny us this latitude. to apply our minds and reason to the Bible the same way we would apply it to the Constitution. And we must abandon this book to its enemies. I'm afraid that's what we've done. That we've abandoned the Bible and its messages of hope and love and care, and that we've abandoned Jesus to be used by those who would have him be a symbol of militarism and empire, capitalism, nationalism, division, and hate. Now, I can't talk about Christian nationalism without mentioning our current Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. Now, Pete Hegseth ascribes to that Jesus of capitalism, war, and empire. He has a tattoo, a big one, of the symbol of the Crusaders, those medieval European soldiers who fought in the name of Christ to convert and dominate foreign lands. The Pete Hegseths, the religious right, they have an enormous amount of power right now in terms of the military. I don't know if you heard this news, but United States service people in bases across our country, hundreds of them, filed complaints just a few weeks ago when they were told in bases across the country by their commanders that the attacks on Iran were part of God's divine plan to bring about Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. Our United States servicemen and women in the year 2026 were told by commanders across the country that this war was to bring about the return of Jesus Christ. That's a lot of power that the religious right has right now. The religious right also has a huge amount of power influencing reproductive justice, the right to abortion care. And they have a huge influence right now over the legislation that is limiting the rights, access, medical care, and inclusion of transgender people across our country. It's a very narrow band of Christianity, and they have a lot of power. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And I understand wanting to distance ourselves from that hatred and hypocrisy. I get it. I know so many of us, including me, who have been afraid to tell people that we go to a church on Sunday mornings because we don't want them to associate us with that kind of faith. But have we, in the words of Channing, abandoned those messages to their enemies? An old trope that is attributed to many people, it's a little story, I don't know who it actually is attributed to. It's that a minister is sitting on a train or a plane or at a cocktail party, and someone asks what he does. In the story, it's always a he. And he confesses that he's a minister. Rookie mistake. You never tell a stranger that you're a minister. And the person says, "Oh, I don't believe in God." To which the minister replies, "Tell me about this God that you don't believe in." I think many of us would answer that question similarly. I don't believe in a God that is a old white man sitting on a cloud with a long beard, and he's judging everyone, and he hates some people and not others. I don't believe in that God. I sure don't believe in the God of Pete Hegseth. And since I have studied the Bible, I'm pretty sure Pete hasn't read it. So yeah, I don't believe in that God. But my answer to, do you believe in God, should not be defined by the Pete Hegseths of the world. We don't have the very narrow option of believe or don't believe in that God. We're Unitarian Universalists. We are the people of wonder. We have so many more options available to us. We have the right to claim for ourselves whatever it is that we find in our study, in our relationships, in our experiences about any aspect of the holy. Do you believe in God? Is a big question. It could mean many, many things. And I want to be able to say what that preacher said at that UU church in Fort Worth so many years ago. I want to say, Jesus and I left. And we went together. And we found something new. And we created something beautiful together. I want to say, I rediscovered the Jesus who welcomes the outcast, who empowers the women, who is the one who shows up to the women first upon his resurrection, the one who insists on healing people, even when the rules say that he can't. The Jesus who flipped over the tables when the authorities were corrupting the temple with their money and their greed. I love table flipping Jesus. The one who said that the poor and hungry are blessed, and then proceeded to feed them. I want more of that. And as the religious left, that's us, we're the religious left, we also get to claim Jesus. We get to claim that Jesus and stake our place in the landscape that is trying and succeeding in shaping our nation. Now, since I grew up in Texas, I'm pretty excited about their new Senate candidate. Even though I loved Jasmine Crockett, don't get me wrong, I'm pretty excited about James Tallarico, the former middle school teacher and Presbyterian seminarian, who is currently a Texas state representative and now U.S. Senate candidate. He has made headline news for saying things like Jesus would be offended by the wars that we are embroiled in, for saying that he opposes the gun lobby, for affirming transgender rights, for saying that God is non-binary. Now, look, as your minister, I'm telling you that that is a more accurate biblical reading than anything the transphobes are spouting. God is non-binary. James Tallarico is speaking up for the Jesus that he finds in the Bible, and people are resonating with his message. Now, me personally, I'm still not a Christian, but I am here for James Tallarico's Jesus. And I think our society needs him too. Easter is about life overcoming death. It's about women being the first to know the truth. It's about a people devastated by loss and then given hope. It's about forgiveness and community care. Forgiveness, that's what Jesus did while still on the cross, forgave the criminal next to him and the people who were executing him. Now, whether you believe in the bodily resurrection or not, or maybe you're just not sure, we can still claim these messages for our faith. Empowerment, hope, care, life, and new possibilities. This Easter, let's let Jesus out of the tomb. Let's let him free. Let's set him free from those teeny tiny little boxes that other people have put him in, and the ones that we have put him into. And in doing so, let's set ourselves free. Amen. And may it be so.